International Office as a regional manager, recruiting international students from all over the world. Today, I am joined by the wonderful Rebecca Gladwin-Geoghegan, who is Associate Head of Marketing and Recruitment at the School of Law at Coventry University. And Rebecca will talk to us today about the legacy of lockdown and the legal opportunities in a post-COVID-19 world. She has been with us at Coventry University for 8 years. She has gone through various roles, from being course director and now is also the Associate Head of Marketing and Recruitment, and is the best person to talk to you about the legal opportunities in a post-COVID-19 world. So today's session, she'll be talking to you, and then at the end we'll have Q&A. So if you would like to ask us any questions, please pop them on the chat. At the top of your screen, you'll see a dialogue window with like a little question mark. So if you click there and post your questions. But yeah, let me introduce you to Rebecca, and welcome, Rebecca. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Flo, for the lovely introduction. So yeah, today I'm going to be talking to you about the legal opportunities that have been presented as a consequence of the changes that we've had to make in response to the pandemic. And this is particularly focusing, obviously, on the legal profession. So one of the things I'm going to firstly discuss with you is the opportunities that the digitisation of the court system have presented in terms of the administration of justice in the UK, and also potential pitfalls or difficulties that will need to be addressed and will need to be overcome in the future. We're also going to look at how that has in turn impacted the particular profession. We've all had to adapt to working from home, and that is as true of legal professionals as it is of everybody else. And then I'm going to explore in a little bit more detail about how those things have impacted the prospects for students and for graduates moving into those legal careers in the future. So the digitisation of the justice system has long been on the cards in the UK. It's been on the agenda for some time, and in early 2015, the UK undertook a significant review of the court system. And they recommended, as part of that review process, that the domestic court system needed to be modernised. And an aspect of that modernisation was the adoption of a more digital approach to the justice system. Now, the Lord Chancellor, the Lord Chief Justice and the Senior President of the tribunals, in a report entitled Transforming Our Justice System, hailed the domestic UK justice system as the envy of the world because it's a particularly independent judiciary. But if it's going to retain that prominence, it needs to adapt and needs to change. Now, the government back in 2016 pledged around about £700 million into the modernisation of the court system, with a further £270 million devoted to the criminal justice system, which is perhaps arguably the most sort of traditional of the courts aspects of the court system in the UK. So we can see that there was a significant investment at this time, but progress was slow. The court system adapted, so it got more used to sort of digitising evidence, submitting case filings online, and also online plea submissions. But beyond this, the progress was quite slow. And although there were instances where maybe a trial evidence was provided by video link, like we're doing now, they were sort of relatively few and far between. They weren't things that happened very commonly. And there were technological issues that arose that prevented further development. So having a really good IT infrastructure in place wasn't something that readily happens in a lot of the domestic courts, because they tend to be based in very, very beautiful but older buildings that don't necessarily have that infrastructure in place. There were also challenges around the openness of proceedings and public accessibility to hearings. Now, in the UK, if you come to the UK and study a degree with us, you can pop into the court and you can go and watch a hearing. You can go and sit through a criminal trial. They are readily accessible. to members of the public. And that's something that we perceive as being really important as part of our justice system. But obviously, if we're doing things digitally, that potentially restricts that accessibility. So this had been a concern around developing the justice system, so it was more digitally capable. Now, COVID-19, as much as it is a sort of a catastrophic event in some respects, has been a huge motivator for change. It has forced everybody to adapt in a sense that was incredibly rapid, that we don't normally see that type of development taking place. And now, where there was some consternation around adapting the justice system so as to facilitate it being administered wholly digitally, and there was some concern about doing this, the prospect of just simply downing tools and waiting for the pandemic to pass just simply isn't an option. The courts and justice system have had to adapt rapidly, and that can be seen as a very positive change. It would be otherwise have been a change that was already planned, that would have taken a number of years, that now has become a reality incredibly quickly. Now, just to give you an idea of how quickly the justice system adapted, in the first few weeks of March 2020, obviously when the pandemic first was announced, there were fewer than 1,000 virtual hearings that took place to administer justice in the UK. Now, by mid-April, that had progressed to in excess of 3,000. So there's a threefold increase. And that was just in the first initial period of the lockdown back in 2020. And we can see over time that that has developed even further. And this was not just the case that little parts of hearings were being done online. So it wasn't a case that we would have just the filing of evidence or just, I don't know, the sentencing being administered online for a trial. This was whole hearings, whole civil hearings in particular, were adapted so that they could be facilitated online, just almost as we are doing now. And I was speaking to Flo about the video that circulated of the judge and the legal counsel over in the States that had the filter on of the cat, which is a joke, but that's the reality. This is how court hearings are now being administered. And in many aspects of the justice system, the court has adapted really well. There have been some really significant success stories. So Fowler and Commission of Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs was the first Supreme Court case that was heard entirely virtually, and that took place obviously in 2020. So it adapted very, very quickly. Now, in case you don't know, the Supreme Court is the highest court of appeal in the UK. There have, however, been some other aspects of the justice system that have been less easily adapted to a digital means of administering justice. And that's particularly seen in the criminal justice system. Now, the criminal justice system has been much slower to adapt. If you are somebody that's looking to operate in civil law, fantastic. There's been huge developments and huge strides in delivering justice digitally. In the criminal justice system, that has not happened in quite the same way. And this is because of the way in which criminal justice is administered in the UK. In the Magistrates' Court, obviously, we have a magistrate who sits and presides over the trial, and obviously parties are involved. Now that to some respect can be translated online, but where we have much more difficulty is where we have more serious criminal offences that have to be heard at the Crown Court. And the Crown Court necessitates a jury trial. Now, having a jury trial with 12 members of the jury, with sufficient degrees of confidentiality, with the calling of evidence, So bringing different witnesses, the defendant, the victim, to be able to give their oral testimony in court is much more difficult to administer. And this is one aspect of the criminal justice system that really has slowed down as a consequence of the pandemic. As of January this year, the outstanding number of Crown Court cases has risen to 53,000 outstanding Crown Court cases. And there is an indication that Crown Court cases will take up to 4 years to now be heard, because the criminal justice system has opted to facilitate Crown Court trials by using what we've been referring to as Nightingale courtrooms. Courtrooms that are more socially distanced, that are spread out in a way that people can attend, rather than converting online. So we can see that where digitally enhanced justice has been adopted, we haven't seen that significant backlog as we see in the civil justice system, but in the criminal justice system, that has not necessarily been the case. Now, there are clearly concerns about those people who are awaiting their trial. They're effectively being remanded on bail or in custody for long periods of time for cases that obviously haven't been heard and aren't going to be heard for some time. And also there's concerns about witnesses, victims being able to remember what happened 4 years down the line from when the first incident first occurred. So this has become a significant concern in the UK regarding the criminal justice system, which, to be honest, if it's something that you're interested in, is a perfect opportunity to engage in some research about how the criminal justice system could be adapted to facilitate and alleviate this backlog of cases. So in terms of the opportunities and the future challenges that are presented, we can see that there have been some really positive changes as a consequence of COVID due to this rapid digitalisation of the justice system that I said is primarily within the context of civil proceedings. So things like family proceedings, business-related proceedings, civil cases, they have all significantly benefited from this rapid digitalisation. Now, these are obviously measures that we've had to take as a consequence of the particular circumstances that we're in. But we now have the opportunity to review the progress that we've made and look to ways in which we can develop a more sustainable justice system that takes all the positives from digitisation. And some of those things could be that a digitalised court hearing can be more easily administered, it can be less time consuming, there isn't the cost involved as regards to making people attend court. And actually, digital hearings may be more appropriate in some circumstances. So if, for example, you've got two parties where it wouldn't be in their interest to meet with one another, potentially maybe contentious family proceedings, or where there's a degree of animosity between parties, actually being able to facilitate hearings in sort of that more neutral environment away from the courtroom may actually be better for the administration of justice. It also means that people who are overseas, for example, where actually it would be very costly or time consuming for them to come back to the UK to litigate a particular issue, can now join more effectively from overseas. So it has the potential effect of making the the civil justice system more effective. But as I say, the criminal justice system is one area where it is facing significant challenges as a consequence of the pandemic. And that's something that the legal profession and those people who are involved in the review of the criminal justice system will need to be addressing over the coming months and potentially years. So what does this mean for legal professionals or legal service providers? So what does it mean when you actually are working in that profession? Well, the legal industry was already amidst a technological revolution of some sorts, in line with the general ethos of the justice system to move to a more digitally enhanced delivery of justice. So some big companies, big organisations, people like Allen and Overy and Clifford Chance in the UK, and those Dentons, for example, who operate overseas significantly, had already started engaging with that sort of technological revolution. So they would develop certain tools that allow them to enhance their practice digitally. But like with the justice system, this wasn't sort of a whole-scale revolution that took place. And that's what the pandemic has facilitated, this sort of wholesale revisiting of the way in which we conduct our businesses, the way in which we conduct legal practices, the way in which we conduct the justice system. Now, I'm not going to suggest for that the current situation of working from home that most people globally are experiencing is what in reality is going to occur after the pandemic. Very few of us will be at home working 100% at home, no social interaction outside of our screens. We wouldn't be trying to work with children around, with dogs jumping up in the background of your meetings. But this has created quite a significant shift in the mindset around office-based working. The legal profession was very much a profession which was centered on office-based culture. You went into your practice, your chambers, you went into your firm, or if you're working in-house somewhere, you'd go there. And it was very much premised on you do your work in your practice. And this has, the way in which we've had to adapt and work from home has had a significant impact on the perspectives of whether or not that's feasible. Because very much in the legal profession before the pandemic, it was many people were of the view that it simply couldn't be done. You could not be a lawyer and work from home because of confidentiality issues, the trust that you have to develop with a client. It simply was not seen as something that would be feasible. But we've had to adapt, we've had to change. And this shift in thinking that working from home is not just a possibility, it's a reality, may have an impact on the way in which legal professionals operate. This may facilitate better work-life balance. If you're able to go for a run at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, but then pick up your case later on, you may have that better work-life balance, particularly when you remove all the pressures that are currently occurring as a consequence of lockdown rather than just flexible working. It also may open up this idea of better flexibility in working practices. So you could opt as somebody to be able to work from home and work in an office. And businesses, as they move forward, and I'm talking about businesses in sort of a very broad sense, but incorporating legal service businesses, that they need to ensure that they are able to develop a healthy balance between ensuring that the company operates in an efficient way whilst also facilitating this good work-life balance. Now, one of the things that we've seen that where this has occurred, particularly in the legal profession, which is a direct response to the pandemic, is as the consequence of signing electronic signatures. If you were having to get a signatory and you were having to have your signature verified by a solicitor, that would necessitate somebody going into a practice, the solicitor witnessing that. And we've actually developed, as a response to COVID, a way in which that can be facilitated digitally that's now acceptable. Now, that is an area where there is much greater efficiency, and it allows a legal practitioner to work in a way where technology enhances their practice rather than hindering it. And one of the other significant areas of development is the possibility for improved mobility. It used to be much more the case that if you were to work in a practice, you would have to live reasonably locally to that practice. If you were operating in London, you'd live, I mean, obviously the London commuter belt for legal practitioners is relatively wide. But you would, generally speaking, live in the area that you would be operating in, that you were working in. And it may be the case that that simply isn't the restriction that we see any longer. And actually really fantastic legal minds and legal practitioners can operate from across the world within certain practices. So it really has provided the opportunity to sort of open up the doorway to operating on a much more sort of global and international scale. Now, one of the other impacts, not just in the working practice of legal professionals, but also in practice areas, is that there is going to be a significant amount of work to be done as a consequence of the pandemic. So the specific legal work that arises from the pandemic. So things like, particularly if you are interested in working in business and corporate related areas, business disruption cases, contract law, issues around insolvency, mergers and acquisitions, employment related disputes arising out of people being furloughed. There are a whole host of emerging, not necessarily practice areas, but work existing in these practice areas. Particularly if you're thinking about postgraduate qualifications, those postgraduate qualifications that align with those areas, something like our international commercial law program, facilitates engaging in that sort of current, up-to-date issues that will then translate into the workplace. Now, unfortunately, also criminal work is, although there has been a significant slowdown in criminal cases because the criminal justice system hasn't been able to adapt in the same way, we can foresee that that is going to have to ramp up significantly once measures are alleviated. And there is obviously going to be great opportunity for individuals to work within the criminal setting. And also there have been instances where criminal behaviour has unfortunately been perpetuated by the pandemic. So instances of domestic violence, for example, have increased significantly as a consequence of the pandemic, and those types of cases will need to be addressed. The pandemic has also exposed various different aspects of sort of social inequality as a consequence of the way in which society has had to respond to the pandemic. That will afford people opportunity for working in those areas and researching in those areas. And the last aspect would be conveyancing. Conveyancing is an aspect of the law that was particularly hard hit during the pandemic because people were not selling houses despite the fact, or buying properties, despite the fact that the UK government put measures in place to facilitate that. And that has really shut down once again, but we can see the prospect of that ramping up due to efforts to facilitate economic recovery. So that idea of getting businesses back up and running, conveyancing, those sort of normal practices that generate economic benefits will be occurring. And this is obviously something that law touches on so many different aspects of life that law will, or legal practitioners will have their own part to play in this recovery. Now, what does this mean for law graduates and law students? So for law graduates, as I said, the firms that are looking to recruit, and it's still, there is still an awful lot of legal work opportunities out there. It means that firms, solicitors practices, chambers who are providing pupilages, etc., have potentially the opportunity to have a much wider pool of talent from which they can pick from, and they can attract some of the really, really exceptional candidates, even though they may not be situated in a particular locality of the practice or the business that is looking to recruit. So effectively, as a law graduate, it opens the doorway to a significant market that probably wasn't available to you unless you are willing to move location, move locality. We also have the opportunity as graduates, and this is something I've been explaining to the law students that we currently have at the law school, that you have, as well as the legal practitioners, had to adapt. Law students have had to change in a relatively similar way, and law students now and law graduates now have the opportunity to demonstrate that they are able to cope with this digital environment. they have to take their class, they have been taking their classes on Teams, they have been engaging in digital platforms in a way that they probably didn't do in quite the same degree before the pandemic. So now graduates are able to demonstrate that they are effectively ahead of the curve because they have had the opportunity of undergoing a digitally enhanced learning experience at university. And also students that have made it through the pandemic, who have successfully graduated, be that from an undergraduate qualification or a postgraduate qualification, are able to demonstrate such a high degree of resilience and adaptability because they have been able to succeed despite the circumstances that have been thrown at them. And having that resilience and adaptability is a characteristic which is really highly regarded within not just the legal profession, but all professions. And so law graduates, as they are leaving us sort of over the next couple of years, are going to be able to almost implicitly demonstrate that they have those capabilities through their achievement in very difficult circumstances. Now, what does it mean for a student actually undertaking their studies at the moment? Well, we have seen in Coventry Law School a huge increase in the interactivity, or the interaction rather, between students and the legal professions. And this is not just legal professionals who are in practice, but legal professionals, maybe legal academics, because we've all been forced to start using things like Teams and Zoom. And as a consequence of that, organising things or events where students get to interact with those people that are in the professions they are looking to go into is not dictated by whether or not we can find a lecture theatre on a certain day to accommodate a number of students. It is facilitated so much more easily by having these online platforms like Teams, like Zoom, to be able to use or to be able to provide those opportunities with students. So I think in the law school over the last semester, because we've been entirely online, we have had at least 2 events every single week with legal practitioners or legal professionals coming in and sharing their experiences, giving students the opportunity to ask questions, to engage with them. And many of those have led on to further opportunities, things like virtual work experience. Now, before, work experience was predicated on whether or not you can attend a week working with a practitioner. There are obviously implications in terms of being able to afford to do that, because if you're commuting, that can make it more difficult. I remember when I was a student, when I was doing my law degree a fair few years ago now, that work experience was something that was really difficult, firstly to come by and also to engage in, because it was quite costly. I was having to commute into London to work with a barrister or with a solicitor. And now actually many of the opportunities that were previously available have been converted so they're online. So you can integrate and have that practical experience, be that a short-term 1 week virtual placement with the CPS, like some of our undergraduate students, or be that a year-long placement, like some of our students are currently undertaking. That can all be now facilitated virtually, which potentially makes those opportunities much more accessible to a wider pool of students. So it's having the effect of taking away some of those prohibiting factors which may have stopped somebody from engaging and getting the best out of their experience. We also have the opportunity to utilise all the other things that law firms, legal practitioners, etc., are utilising to train their own students, their own practitioners rather, because everybody has been adapting to providing things online. They then become recorded assets, they then become available. So there is a significantly greater opportunity to engage in genuine practice focused experiences for law students, much more so than there's ever been before. And I know that as Coventry Law School, sort of speaking for the entirety of the school now, that this is something that we've been very much keen to monopolise on, so that our students are getting the best experience possible whilst they're with us, and that is informed by all the opportunities and things that are available within the legal profession as well. So although the pandemic has been to a certain extent doom and gloom, there have been significant opportunities for development due to this rapid digitalisation, not just in the justice system, but also in the profession, and for those opportunities that are available to law students and law graduates. If anyone has any questions about anything I've discussed, I'm more than happy to take them now.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Very insightful and very useful. And I think that many of us who perhaps have no background in law were interested to see that, yeah, one of the things that has sparked immediately is like digitalization of the way we work in the courts and in the justice system. It's not something that perhaps was prepared to have such a drastic push and jump, and people used to do things more like face to face and have things on paper and sign, like you say, signatures. It's difficult because, well, one of the questions I have for you, obviously, with the digitalization of everyone's, pretty much all industries are having to take an online approach and become more digital and be tech savvy. I think that very rightly you say now for our students and for the future. Do you think that perhaps being tech savvy is a key skill for a law student? And yeah, apart from that, like what other key skills do you think that we need to have? I think that obviously we have the students coming through who are from the Generation Z, who are very familiar with all the technology, but perhaps for, at the moment, the people that are currently working in the industry may not have all the skills and they're just having to learn by force.
Yeah, I think students that are definitely coming up through sort of legal education are going to have an advantage over those maybe that are already operating, because they have, I think there's a difference between being tech savvy in sort of the social sense. I'm reasonably tech savvy with using sort of Instagram and those sorts of things, people using TikTok, etc. But being tech savvy within the context of the legal profession is something that's quite different, and actually doing things like having classes, etc., in the way in which we've been administering them is more reflective of that. So it's developing technological capabilities that are outside the normal sort of social tech experiences that we have, and I think that is going to be key, that individuals, when they're moving into the profession, feel comfortable that they can operate in that way, and that will become an increasingly important. It was already sort of on the back burner that tech was becoming much more important and tech competencies were becoming much more important, but now we've sort of shifted so much more quickly than we'd envisaged. That tech capabilities are going to be important as one of the skills for graduates entering the market. But so too are other skills as well, sort of adaptability, resilience, the ability to conduct independent research and think in a critical and sort of pragmatic way are also skills that are really important as we're moving into the profession. Now, obviously, all the courses at Coventry are designed to facilitate a person developing those skills as they move through the course, be that at an undergraduate or a postgraduate level. So there are, but I think being able to operate in a digitally enhanced environment is something that is kind of almost going to be a presumed skill that individuals must have if they're thinking of operating, because I don't think, although there may be a withdrawal in the legal professions from some aspects of digitally enhanced services, so people may be going back into court more readily. They may see clients on a face-to-face basis, because actually sometimes that's a more appropriate way of dealing with things. But a whole-scale withdrawal back is probably not going to happen. So graduates have got to be prepared to go into that market with that skill set.
That's actually very related to my next questions. And do you see this change being for good, or do you think that the law sector, like the justice system in general, will go back to having those face-to-face sessions, hearings, meetings, all the, I mean, probably, I think maybe perhaps this is what I think, my opinion might be that documentation and things like that will definitely stick to digital, but when it comes to actually dealing with people, and especially you mentioned the criminal justice system is one that has taken a slower progress in adapting. Why do you think that is?
I think just with the I would say probably the criminal justice system is probably the most traditional out of the very different aspects of the justice system. So tribunals and the civil justice system have adapted in a way more easily because of the way in which justice is administered. So you may only have one judge or a tribunal judge presiding over hearings, and the way in which evidence is adduced in court is very different to a criminal trial where you have a judge and 12 members of the jury, and although it's not quite how it is in the films, it's much more akin to that. So you'd call witnesses, and you'd have the victim give oral testimony, the defendant will give their testimony, and there's examination and cross-examination by the parties. It's much more traditional in the way in which those trials are conducted, and that is where they've really struggled to develop. And I don't necessarily think huge strides will be taken in the criminal justice system, because rather than adapting, they're trying to make sort of physical adaptations to courtrooms. So things like the Nightingale courtrooms, having courtrooms with sheets of plexiglass everywhere, so people are divided in a courtroom, have kind of been the approach that the civil justice system has taken. But it's going to really put the spotlight on the civil justice system, that it hasn't been able to adapt. And actually, is this the best way of administering justice, or are there things that we can do that will facilitate clearing that backlog of cases and ensuring that, because one of the purposes of the justice system is to ensure that cases are dealt with in a way which is expedient, which is fair, and that all is questionable when you're waiting 4 years for your case to be heard in a court. So I think the criminal justice system won't make the digital steps that have been seen in the civil justice system, but it may take other steps to adapt because of the position that we are sort of now in the criminal justice system. Whereas other aspects, so other measures that have been taken, so conducting a hearing entirely online, it didn't happen before the pandemic, and now we've got courtrooms that are or members of the judiciary and legal practitioners who are much more familiar with doing that. But actually, the days of getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning and catching the train over to the civil courts, I don't know, in Cambridge somewhere, and having to do a hearing are potentially fewer and further between, because we can just do everything online. And I don't think some of those we will ever go back from some of the steps that have been taken or the progress that's been made.
No, absolutely. It's like anything, I think, with different industries, there's different ways to adapt. Not everything can become absolutely online. You see just the simple case of the supermarkets, like people still need to go to the shops, even though we have online shopping. People will still prefer to go to the shops, and they have taken the measures of protective screens at the tills and things like that. So I think that it will be exactly the same with the justice system. They will be just in the preventative measures, and hopefully when the vaccines will roll out, it'll be much better for people to attend the hearings.
But I think we've seen within legal practices, a lot of legal practices have been either legal practices or people who work in house or businesses that relate with them that have been adapting their sort of company policies to accommodate the fact that we're working digitally, and we are finding that companies or firms, etc., that would have previously been absolutely we're not taking part in this digital thing. We're not a technology. We are very traditional. I mean, back in the day of you'd have a library with some law reports in your chambers. That was still quite prevalent before the pandemic, that sort of attitude, and just people simply haven't been able to maintain that attitude, because if they don't adapt and don't change, they're not going to continue operating, they're not going to continue functioning. So it's forced groups of people that would have previously been very reluctant to engage in anything digital, they've been forced to do that. And then I think sometimes people get forced and think, actually, it's not as bad as I thought it was, or they're just more confident with it.
Yeah, absolutely. You kind of get forced into it, and you're okay. You know what? It's not so bad. Yeah. Absolutely. And for example, with I know you were mentioning about virtual work experience. I'm sure that students listening in would like to know what sort of things. Obviously, students are encouraged to take placements over the summer, or like a sandwich year where they go into an internship. And the university obviously helps the students get this with the help of our employability team. And our placements teams. Now, with the pandemic, for the future students who would like to join us, what does a virtual experience of working would look like, or what do you think that the students currently are doing to be able for them to get the skills that they need?
It really varies depending on where it is that you're doing a virtual work experience with. So if you are somebody who is on a more long-term placement, so for example, we have 3 pro bono clinics at Coventry University. And 2 are currently in operation. So we have the Employment Law Clinic and the Advocacy Clinic, and then they're available to any undergraduate student who wants to apply to them. They can apply and take part in that. And that is being facilitated entirely online. It was started off, it was socially distanced in our courtroom in the university building, where you'd meet clients over Teams or Zoom or something like that. And obviously the Coventry Law Centre, Central Law England Coventry Law Centre had already started to adapt to digitisation of documents, etc. So actually, it kind of a happy coincidence that all occurred at the same time. So students are still actually being involved in interviewing clients, giving those clients advice, drafting letters, filing issues, things with court, etc. So they're very much involved in that process still. It's just facilitated exactly like how we would be doing it here, just with a computer. Other placements that are, I know students that were on placements or longer term placements, obviously were on placement when the pandemic hit. And so had to sort of rapidly change the way in which that placement experience happened. But those placements didn't stop. We didn't just hit March last year and everyone who was on a placement went, oh, sorry, I haven't got a placement anymore. They adapted in exactly the same way that people who were working and operating in those firms were working. So lots of people set up their desks in their homes, and they worked through their computer, but they were still engaging with the work that takes place, still with mentorship with members of the firms that they were working at. And then what has actually happened, there are these sort of more bespoke virtual placements that have been set up specifically during the pandemic. So that we have, for example, we collaborate with the Crown Prosecution Service, and we have they have launched a virtual placement scheme across the UK. And Coventry University, because we have this affiliation with the Crown Prosecution Service and with one member of the CPS in particular, we have a dedicated set of placements that are available just to Coventry University students. So you're not competing in that sort of national market, so to speak. And that may be something like exploring a case that has occurred, so looking at how they make prosecution decisions, how to examine and cross-examine witnesses, etc. And they're all being sort of literally set up to be able to be doing those activities online. So you get that it's kind of opened this doorway to have this insight into what it's like to be in practice without ever having to sort of step outside of your front door, which it just didn't occur before the pandemic. There's loads of opportunities.
Yeah, you're right. And then I think people seem to forget, like, all these people working currently in these professions have had to adapt to COVID-19 and from home. So it's exactly the same. Not like it's not something that just never, these people suddenly are doing nothing, sat at home. Like this, like every single one of us will be adapting to the new normal and in the way of working, and it happens exactly the same with the students going to placements. And we have a fantastic team that helps the students and amazing lecturers as well who will be there to support them. So for those students who are looking like at having a placement, hopefully as well with the things seeming to improve in the UK, people will be able to have those perhaps contact within an office or within a court, and be able to get those experiences as well. We also have, you know, in campus we have our moot room for like basically for students to pretend they're in court and have like the kind of like ability to practice as if it were in real life, and those will still be available for them, right?
Yeah. So I'm actually running a mooting competition. So a moot is like a fictitious court hearing, not a hearing at a trial, but it would be a fictitious appeal. So it gives us opportunities for students to do to act and communicate in the way that legal practitioners would do. So it's like, may it please your lordship, my name is Rebecca Gladwin-Geoghegan, and I'm hearing on behalf of the lead appellant. All of that experience, we're still doing all of those things. And actually, I think students moving into sort of the next academic year are probably going to get almost a better experience than those students that are already here and experience it, because they actually may be getting the best of both worlds. They may be getting that digitally enhanced online experience as well as the opportunities through the development of their course to have those on-campus face-to-face experiences as well. So actually, I think probably more so than was the case last year, September is a really exciting period of time to be entering into education.
Absolutely, I totally agree. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I think like everybody has like really enjoyed your presentation. And if the students have any questions, would they be happy to contact you? If not, we can. I'm just going to put here in the chat for anyone who would like to contact us or make any inquiries. So, one second. I'm just going to be putting it here. Yeah, so it would be for anyone who is looking to apply, or if you already have an offer, if you have any questions about this course in particular, or you're interested in learning more about law degree courses, please message us on the chat, and you have there as well the email address that you can contact us on. But thank you, Rebecca, once again for
no problem at all.
And yeah, we're looking forward to seeing you in campus around in the future. Take care. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.